Yep, we've got a quorum, so why don't we get started, do our business, and then we'll record it, and so you can catch up later when you return, Bob, all right?
Well, it's already 10 o'clock here, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So welcome. This is the April 10th meeting of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on Lake Champlain's future. I'm Mark Nutt, chair. We just have a quorum, and so we're going to, I think I'd like to quickly move into our business and then do any public forum matters so that we can take our action items and then move on to public and Abby Willard's presentation on the future of agriculture and the Governor's Committee. So I think the only item is approval of the most recent minutes, our March meeting.
Make a motion to approve the March 13 meeting minutes.
Any second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Denise. So we've got a motion to accept. Are there any comments or edits from anyone? Hi, Hillary. Any comments or edits for the minutes before we look for approval?
No.
Okay, if there's none, then you can either do a wave or a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but all those in favor of accepting the minutes?
Yes.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Bob, if you've got to go, thanks so much for hanging in so we had a quorum, and enjoy the rest of your travels in Ireland.
Yeah, no, I'm near Galway now. We were at Dingle for 3 days, and then we were at Cork for 3 days. And I had all my children with me and a boyfriend and a girlfriend. So it was 8 of us, but they've all left. And now it's just me and my wife for the next 3 or 4 days. But
Nice.
I better go. She doesn't know I pulled this off. So if you really need me desperately, text me and I'll come back. But bye.
All right, thanks. Bye, Bob.
Bye, Bob.
Okay, so why don't we move on to any public comment? I see we have some guests today. Why don't we start with, who do we have? Kent, you want to introduce yourself, and do you have any comments or items you'd like to discuss that aren't on the minutes or aren't on the agenda?
Thank you very much for the invitation, Mr. Chairman. I'm simply here today to listen to the presentation and watch you guys carry on your good work. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kent. Let's see, on my list, Ricky.
I'm just from the New York CAC, and I love the information you guys give out. So if you don't mind, I'll keep joining.
No, thank you. I appreciate you joining us. I see a unknown user. I don't know the phone number, so I can't speak to that specifically. Is there someone else listening in that from the public?
I'm here on my phone, Denise, but am I showing up as Denise?
Yep, we see you, Denise.
Okay, then it's not me.
Okay. Yeah, the only other person I see on the list is Marley Roop.
Hi, folks. I'm just here because Sarah Coleman is unable to, and because I always like to hear what anytime Abby Willard has something to say. So
Sure.
I'm just listening in. Thanks.
Thanks, Marley. Okay. So I don't know, it just shows up in mine as an unknown user. Katie, I don't know if you've got any more detail, a phone number or something that,
Yeah, I'm not seeing that on my end.
okay, I'll ignore it. Okay, does anyone else, any other committee members have any items not on the agenda they'd like to bring up? Or rearrange the agenda? Otherwise, we'll just move right into Abby's presentation. Okay, so tonight we've got Abby Willard, who's going to update us on the work of the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture. It was formed, I think, 2 years ago, about the same time that we were beginning to have some, I guess, more in-depth meetings around agriculture, water quality, and transitions to alternative agriculture other than dairy. And so their report came out and I think was updated again in November. We discussed it at a prior meeting quickly, and now I've had the opportunity to get through our action plan work and bring Abby in. So I think we've got about an hour of our meeting set aside for this. So with that, Abby, I'm going to let you take it from here. And I'm in the Adirondacks and don't have very good Wi-Fi, so I'm going to turn off my video and just listen for the next hour or so. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, all. It's so nice to see familiar faces and have the invitation and opportunity to share with you about the Future of Ag Commission recommendations. As Mark said, my name's Abby Willard. I'm the Director of Ag Development at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and have been one of the staff supporting the Future of Ag Commission's work over the past few years. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. It only has 9 slides, so it should be relatively brief and succinct, but as a way to sort of capture many of the highlights that I wanted to share with you. I'm also going to just quickly pop in the chat here, if that's a feature that you guys use, which is the link to the Agency of Agriculture's website that pertains to the future of agriculture and the commission. Excuse me, that includes links to access both the reports that were produced in 2021 and 2022. So if you haven't, I'm assuming you visited that site, but if you haven't been there before, there's an opportunity for you to access that link now. Can someone tell me if you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Let me see if I can. Okay, great, and I can still see you. Well, thanks for your interest in wanting to hear about the work of the commission. I hope that in this presentation I can, give you a little bit of a summary of the commission's work, review the most recent report that was submitted to the governor's office in November of 2022 and then made public just after his budget address. Highlight some of the successful investments that have been made that kind of align with the recommendations in the reports. Talk about what the commission is up to and where I think there's some upcoming opportunities. And then I hope that my presentation will not take a full hour, but that we'll have real opportunity for discussion and questions and dialogue after that. Okay, let's see if I can advance to the next slide. Great. So as was mentioned, the Vermont Commission on the Future of Agriculture was established by the governor via an executive order in 2021. And the charge of that commission was sort of that second bullet, which I'll just read, which is to advise on short and long-term strategies and specific action plans with measurable outcomes to advance key economic, social, and environmental goals in the agriculture and food sectors. So that was sort of the charge to the commission. The objective, so then there was a very public process of assigning commissioners, appointing commissioners to the group, and creation of the scope of work. The commission was really clear that they didn't want to redo any of the work that's already been done on contemplating and collecting data around best opportunities for the future of agriculture in Vermont. And so some of the first tasks that the commission engaged in was reading all the great assessments and priority plans that have already been developed. And one of the most particular was the recommendations put forth by the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and what's called the Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan that was released in 2021 for the next 10 years. The commission was charged with submitting 3 action plans in November of 21, again in 22, and then finally in November of 2023. And those action plans need to include those, strategies and specific action plans, and also provide progress reporting of, what's been done and outcomes of those efforts each year. And then, as I mentioned, the work of the commission is considered privileged discussion because it's an executive order outlining the commission to advise the governor until the governor then decides to make the plans public, which he's done each of the previous 2 years. So the plan and conversations were considered privileged, sent only to the governor, and then after he made his budget address both times, he made the plans public, and that's what you'll find on our website, which is the link that I put in the chat. Commissioners met at least monthly for each of those years, and I'll talk in greater detail over what happens in each of those meetings. And they were really clear early on that they wanted to establish a clear focus for their work, and that's what this picture demonstrates, which is really looking at healthy food access for all, fueling profitable agricultural enterprises, attracting and supporting the next generation of farmers, and strengthening the Vermont brand, all upon a foundation of equity and ecological stability. So that's sort of the framing of the work of the commission since 2021. Here's a list of the 11 current commissioners. We currently have 1 vacancy. So Nick Richardson, who'd been at the Vermont Land Trust, was our 12th commissioner representing land use, and resigned a few months ago when he left the Land Trust. Again, it was a public application process to elect commissioners that then were appointed. Actually, I shouldn't say elect, to identify commissioners who were then appointed by the governor. We've had a few seats turn over and be repopulated since 2021. The commission is chaired by Secretary Anson Tebbets from the Agency of Agriculture and Secretary Lindsay Curley from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And then there's staff support from the Agency of Agriculture, including myself, that kind of guide the commission. And we work with a consultancy team, CBI, Consensus Building Institute, that sort of facilitates and leads many of the conversations on the board. Or the commission, excuse me. So you can see the names there. Some of those, or maybe most of those, are known entities to you. This speaks to a little bit of kind of the work and the progress of the commission over the past 2 years. So as I mentioned, the commission met at least monthly. That's outlined as a directive within the executive order. The commission was really focused each of the past 2 years on engaging stakeholders in the process of identifying their recommendations and priorities. And they did that through a variety of inviting different guest experts or panel presentations. So in 2021, the focus was around understanding the dairy industry, looking at finance, addressing equity issues, and engaging with established groups like the Payment for Ecosystem Services Work Group and the Climate Council's Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. So groups that were engaged in similar efforts. That first report submitted to the governor in November of 2021 included 18 recommendations. 13 of those in some capacity were supported in the subsequent year. So some of that would have been by state appropriation or federal resources, which was impressive to recognize that the funding had the potential to invest over $70 million in the future of agriculture. In calendar year 22, there again, similar process of engaging with stakeholders. The group met with environmental advocates, business assistants, coaches, and a focus on marketing and agritourism. That report, which was just submitted last November, included 13 highlighted recommendations, which was really more of a fine tuning or refinement of recommendations that were in the original report. And of the 14 recommendations included in that 2022 plan for 2023 implementation, 2 of those recommendations were included in the governor's recommended budget for fiscal year 24, totaling $14 million. And we can talk about those 2 items more specifically. So that gives you a sense of sort of the work of the commission. Here's, I would say there's 2 general categories of recommendations that have come out of the commission. The first has been really around infrastructure investments, and the second has been around business assistance support and relationship building. So here are 3 kind of general categories or themes of the investments that the commission has focused on. So the first being leveraging economic development and local food funding opportunities for maximum impact. So that essentially translates to what's the work that's already happening, what's the great accomplishments that are already underway that we can further leverage, while also addressing accessibility and access. The second kind of theme is around clarifying and enhancing the Vermont brand. So the goal really being attracting new business owners and workers and visitors to the state, developing tools that can help businesses reach new customers, and continuing just to maintain or elevate Vermont's market position sort of outside of the state. And then the third in this last plan was around connecting and building trust between ag and environmental stakeholders, with recommendations around stakeholder dialogue to build relationships and enhance further collaboration. So this slide, and I guess I would just say, maybe before I move into the specifics around infrastructure, I think this might be the crux of where there's opportunity to talk about the clear alignment that exists in your committee's Lake Champlain Action Plan. So there were certainly 2 potential overlapping items that I could see. One was around investing in infrastructure and practices that build community resilience to climate change impacts. And I think the commission would believe that agriculture is really key to that. And then the second would be around kind of the ag and environment relationship building. And you outlined that in the recommendation of providing support and resources to farmers to facilitate the ag transition to sustainability and ensure consistent enforcement of regulations. So maybe we'll get into talking about those bits a little bit further. To give you a sense in this slide of some of the infrastructure investments that were highlighted and prioritized by the commission, the objective is to really support and expand successful established programs, as I mentioned earlier. So this is where the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative is a particular focus. The Community Recovery and Revitalization Program that's at the Agency of Commerce Community Development, as well as some of the Climate Smart and Payment for Ecosystem Services work. There was also recommendations around continuing to invest in dairy, in the dairy industry in Vermont, with a focus on transition assistance, as the dairy may want to transition to new markets or new production or next generation, as well as investing in modernization and innovation. So that work has really focused and built off of the successes of the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, which is a regional program based at the Agency of Agriculture here in Vermont. The recommendations in this section also looked at, opportunities to support the next generation of agriculture. So that's investing in meat, maple, and produce as opportunities to grow and attract new businesses, as well as possible succession plans for dairy. Sorry, I think I talked too much today, so my throat's a little dry. This next generation of agriculture is also focused on looking beyond production and also looking at the distribution infrastructure that exists in the state or may not yet exist, about how to get and best get Vermont products to new consumers, across the state, but most likely outside of Vermont and into the region and the nation. So those are the infrastructure kind of investment focus areas. In the business assistance and support, as well as relationship building, the objectives have been to make business expansion and diversification easier, more profitable, clearer, and more accessible to develop and reach new markets and consumers. So the recommendation specifically focused on support for navigating permits and sort of demystifying the regulatory requirements, which would be achieved by building stronger relationships between the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Agency of Natural Resources, and the environmental nonprofit organizations, so that we can really collectively work towards the maximum benefit. Recommendations encouraged supporting the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to expand our program outreach, with a particular focus on reaching BIPOC populations and other underserved communities within the state, as well as addressing systemic racism in our government processes and policy. The last kind of category within the business assistance would be Vermont branding efforts, which can often be difficult to quantify, and therefore we found less desirable to find funding to support. And so this Vermont branding category really looks at, are there research opportunities to explore the current perception of Vermont and the ag and food brand? Are there branding resources that can be shared with small and mid-scale businesses who don't have the resources of their own to hire a marketing or branding consultant? And then eventually, could we build a Made in Vermont or Vermont grown marketing platform? So here's the last slide. And this outlines kind of the future and ongoing future of Ag Commission efforts in the period that we're currently in. So the Commission, as well as the Agency of Agriculture, continues to support the governor's budget, which again included 2 of the infrastructure investment suggestions that were outlined in the plan. One was a one-time appropriation of $10 million to create an economic development for agriculture program focused on supporting meat, produce, and maple industries. And the second was $3 million of a one-time appropriation on top of the $1 million base funding to support the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative program that's existed at the Agency of Agriculture since 2012. Over the rest of the 2023 calendar year, the Commission members are really focused on building a network approach to achieving the 14 priority recommendations that were included in the most recent report to the governor. And that's built on an understanding that all the resources and support for these 14 priority needs are unlikely to come exclusively from state budgets or state programming. And the Commission is also, in its final kind of outlined year, not looking to develop new ideas, but instead wanting to engage with other groups that may have similar goals, to do some idea sharing and some co-design or co-creation of initiatives that can be offered to the governor's office. The Commission's still committed to presentations and discussions with outside groups. They've identified a few priority areas of particular interest, one around land access, learning more about the New England regional food system planning efforts that are underway, having a at-scale conversation around regenerative agricultural opportunities, and then really maybe hoping to understand a bit more around the meat and maple industry needs. So the Commission's task is to still submit their final plan by November 15th of this year, 2023. And assuming that the governor doesn't renew the Commission, the work will end at the end of December. of this year. Right, so that's what I wanted to present with you around the history of the commission and sort of the work that's underway. I'm happy to go into, again, either of the two priorities that are recommended in the governor's budget for FY24. So this new granting program for food producers and value-added processors, talk about the working lands program, or go back up and talk about some of the overlap or collaborative efforts that might exist with the committee's Lake Champlain action plan. But I really, at this point, kind of turn it over to the full group. And I'm happy to stop sharing as well.
Thanks, Abby.
Yep.
I appreciate that. When I was reading through the supplemental report that was issued, I had a question. So in the appendix in 3, they discussed the strategies and then the FY23 budget outcomes. And then I had a question of where relative to those strategies and sort of funding initiatives based on the the priority recommendations of the commission, sort of where are we today for fiscal year 24? Was it pretty much just limited to the big pulse and working lands and then the additional 10 million for infrastructure investment, or were there other continuing funding within the governor's budget recommendations for the commission's initiatives?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Mark. And I think what you're referencing in, which is like the final 2 pages of the 2022 report,
Right.
it outlined the recommendations from the commission and if there was any progress towards achieving any of those goals. Some of that progress could have been due to legislation that and appropriations that passed the legislature, or existed in other programs. So for example, in that list, we had there's some ARPA, so American Rescue Plan Act funds that are outlined there. There's also other initiatives that are taken up by other programs. So I think we talked about the Dairy Business Innovation Center, which again is federal funding through USDA that came to the Agency of Agriculture, but achieves some of the same dairy diversification, dairy innovation objectives. I think we've not yet done this tally for FY23 yet.
Okay.
But I think some of those ARPA infusions are still ongoing. The Dairy Business Innovation Center is still receiving funding from USDA. So I think there's $38 million that's been directed towards that initiative. That's again supports Vermont plus 10 other states in the Northeast region. So it's not just towards Vermont dairy. But I will say I'm not sure we'll have as long and robust of a FY24 budget outcome as we did for FY23. But I have to admit that I haven't done the kind of equivalent calculation and a semblance of resources committed to the initiatives in this most recent report. And I think many of the conversations that the commissioners are going to have over the coming 6 months will help build that budget outcome table as we talk to partners and confirm where there has been activity and success and progress on some of the same priority areas, but by other organizations.
Okay, thanks, Abby. That's answers my question. Kind of what I thought, that it was a work in progress. From my perspective, I was looking for the gap filling and where in our action plan work and where in our initiatives, in where there's alignment, that we can amplify that and see where we can find other opportunities for advancing the recommendations of the commission, because from my read on it, it was fairly focused and fairly achievable. And when we put out our action plan, we hear from the legislators a desire for us to have hone in on things and numbers, right? How much and what can we get done? What's the impact? And so as we've shifted with our work towards looking a few years down the road and looking at our efforts within a biennium, we're trying to be a little more strategic around that. And so that aspect really interested me. So I'll look forward to seeing that when as you're working.
Well, I really appreciate that sentiment, Mark, and kind of focus of this committee. I'll say, I guess, two things in response. One, we've experienced thus far a pretty unusual legislative session. So to a degree, where the budget that the House passed does not meet the budget projections that the governor proposed. So for the Working Lands Program, the governor proposed 3 million one time, and the House passed 1 million. The governor proposed 10 million for this new economic development program focused on meat, maple, and produce, and the House passed that appropriation with 5 million, so half as much. So that in itself is a pretty unusual circumstance. And, we just kind of engaged many of the producer association and stakeholder partners as recent as, last Friday in kind of a campaign to kind of reinstate the governor's recommend for both of those programs. So meaning we're hoping to see Working Lands reinstated at 3 million and this new program reinstated at 10 million. So if we were looking for a place to start, and if there was agreement by this committee of the value of those two programs, that would be my first recommendation.
Okay. No, thanks. I appreciate that. It has been an odd last few weeks of the budget process, as far as I can figure out. So let me be quiet and see if anybody else did. Other questions for Abby from other members? Senator Brock?
Thank you. The one thing I didn't hear in the discussion, and perhaps it's been there, is the issue of resources and specifically labor. We know that a great deal, at least of the conventional dairy workforce, farm workforce in Vermont, are made up of undocumented individuals. The Senate just passed S-102, which is a labor bill. But one of the things in the labor bill that was unusual is it added agricultural workers to the group of people who could join unions in Vermont under the state labor laws. They're excluded, as you may know, from the Federal Labor Relations Act. That could have a huge impact on Vermont and on Vermont farms. Has the group discussed any of this at all?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Senator. I would say that workforce has certainly been a conversation of the commission over the past 2 years. In the first plan, there were recommendations that addressed sort of labor shortages, workforce development strategies, more so than the second plan. And again, recall that this plan was submitted in November before the legislature started its session for 2023. So we hadn't seen S-102 at that time. I think labor is certainly a topic for conversation for the meetings through this spring, summer, and fall for the commission. And I don't know, what the collective position is of the commissioners on that particular bill. They meet in 2 weeks for their April meeting. So we'll have an opportunity to, possibly talk about labor.
Well, that's going to be, it's over in the House right now. And of course, the legislative session is relatively short at this point. So I would expect there's going to be some movement or at least discussion of that. And it would seem to be important that folks who are concerned about agriculture weigh in with their opinions, whatever they may be, about a bill like that, that I think is going to be absolutely critical to the future of conventional farming.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm happy to, one of the things that we have done at the request of the commissioners has been to sort of keep them updated on activity within the legislature. So I'll make sure that we add S102 to the, just bring it to their attention for them to consider if they want to reach out to their representatives.
Carol?
Thank you. So, I think if universal school meals goes through, my hope is that we could use as much of that 27 to $30 million a year to buy Vermont product. And I think that could be transformative for the Vermont farm landscape. If people have value-added products, if farmers have value-added products, if farmers decide, well, they want to rotate crops and use regenerative agriculture and grow oats, not just corn, whatever. I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm just trying to say that we have a chance here with this 27 to $30 million a year, if this passes, to have as much as humanly possible of that money stay in Vermont. And that is just my goal. So, but I'm not sure how to go about it. So rather than say whether or not it's a good thing to do universal school meals, because there's different opinions about that, but if it happens, what can we do to be sure that we have that go to Vermont farmers and to Vermont farms and to regenerative agriculture and to everything that we're trying to incentivize? That's a lot of incentive for us.
Yeah, I really wholeheartedly agree in the value of focusing on increasing the amount of local food in school meals. Alongside the universal meals bill is also the funding to the Agency of Education for the local food purchasing initiative, which that program was funded and was outlined in this final 2 pages of the governor's recommended report that we were just referencing and that Mark brought our attention to, as one of the objectives of increasing local food purchase incentives within K through 12 schools. And so there was a question as to whether that local food purchase incentive program was going to be continued for the next school year. It somehow didn't end up in the Agency of Education's budget to begin with. It has been, as I understand, clearly reinstated as a priority, which incentivizes schools to receive an additional payment per meal served, depending upon what percentage of local food they're currently purchasing. So 15%, 20%, 25% are the 3 different kind of tiered focus areas. And so that program is very directly, and our Agency of Agriculture works closely with the Agency of Education, as well as we've received federal funding through the U.S. Department of Agriculture Farm to School program to continue to work on how do we incentivize local food procurement and tracking within the K through 12 school system. So again, I couldn't agree with you more that that's one of our priority objectives. And I think, personally, when we have the ability and the opportunity to see, unprecedented meals served in school gives us a great opportunity to have an even greater impact on the amount of that food that's purchased locally. I know from many years of working with school food nutrition directors that sourcing local food can be a challenge for them depending upon price point, the amount of staff that they have, and the degree of the processed product that they can access, storage ability within their school food authority, equipment in their kitchen. There's a lot of factors that really influence how schools are able to incorporate more local food. And
Right.
so again, the Agency of Agriculture has a farm to school grant program. It's a relatively modest program. It's $500,000 a year that provides grants to schools that they can purchase equipment, they can make kitchen modifications, they can use it to build relationships with local farms through purchasing a community supported agriculture box share, but all different strategies to help schools be able to more effectively buy local food. And sometimes it's providing more capital resources, and other times it's just about making relationships and connections. And so that program, and I think I'd say the work of the collective farm to school network in Vermont has been focusing on both sides of that opportunity, both providing more resources and helping make more connections. So yeah, I think we too are waiting to see what happens with universal meals. But
Well, I would just ask you, please keep in touch with the
yeah,
agricultural committees and the natural resource committees so that what you need to have that happen, they can be advocates for. We can be advocates for. And this group also. And then before there was such a thing as boxed meals that you could, as a person in the United States of America, order, and then it showed the box comes and you can put the ingredients together and make your own meal. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have people who need, well, about two things. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have Meals on Wheels for children?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I thought was, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have box meals go, boxes where you could cook then, to people who face hunger. So I just wonder, could we do something like these two things? Because again, with Vermont product, and I know it's going to take organization, and I understand those things, but if we could have something where you could suggest how it could happen, we could start and really help it to the extent that there's a transition in farming from one kind of farming to another. That would help if people are sure, like they had output contracts where they knew that we would buy everything that they were putting out, at least for a certain amount of time or whatever. But just so we can really help Vermont agriculture.
Yeah, I love the vision that you're outlining there. And I think there are many components to achieving that vision that you just shared. And it's being done in a variety of different ways. So a program actually that just ended called Vermont Everyone Eats was kind of created during the pandemic. And that was about preparing prepared meals that by restaurant workers using ended up being about 30% local food to anyone that requested a meal and went to the restaurant that was participating in the program and received a meal at no cost. And the state and federal resources that supported that program provided the restaurant with $10 per meal to prepare that prepared to-go meal.
Mm-hmm.
There has been a lot of interest in finding ways to continue that program. And again, it was not just a food security agenda or just a viable ag initiative. It was really about kind of supporting community and workforce and feeding people generally. So there's momentum around that program concept. There's also probably at least a half a dozen different initiatives in Vermont, which have a variety of different names, but they're essentially called healthcare shares, which the idea is that an individual can visit their primary care provider and access to local food on a weekly basis can be prescribed to that individual to help improve their health outcomes.
Wow.
And so that means, it's kind of like the food is medicine concept, funded through a variety of state and federal initiatives, kind of the, you know, prescription program, essentially food prescription program. And again, it's connected to health outcomes and to risk, not so much to just feed anyone, but you do have to sort of like meet some sort of a threshold or indicator of a health concern to be eligible for those meals. And then, I think the third piece is just more of like a general focus in recent years, and this has sort of even been like over the last 10 years, is really trying to encourage large scale institutional buyers, so hospitals, colleges, schools, to do what we call forward contracting with farmers, to sort of say at the beginning of the season or in the winter, actually before the season starts, to make a commitment of buying for an entire season from a farmer.
Yeah.
And there's even been examples where those buyers, so those institutional markets, have actually offered infrastructure funding to help them purchase the farm, to purchase a greenhouse or a special piece of equipment, or make that forward contracting commitment more possible. It's not happening everywhere, and it's not happening, maybe as consistently as desired, but there is kind of movement in, helping farmers feel like they're part of a longer term commitment with many buyers. And that could be food co-ops as well. So those retail markets, as well as some of those institutional accounts. So I think I think the vision that you have, Carol, that you outlined is really shared by many of us in the food system world. And many of those pieces are in place, not all.
Yeah, well, and please let us help get these things going. Because I love what you're saying. Love it all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carol. Other questions? Abby, I've got a follow-up. I understood that one of the gap opportunities was the need for the enhanced hub distribution networks, storage, cool storage facilities that facilitated, a lot of the opportunities I think Carol was outlining, creating that network that facilitates the farmers with the place to sell their products to, and sort of the throughputs in that market system. Was any of that funding part of the governor's $10 million request? Was it focused on that? I knew there was a specific item and a recommendation in the report, and I know the Sustainable Jobs Fund work has been really focusing on expanding that. And I just wondered whether is that a piece of that $10 million that was cut in half?
Yeah.
And is that part of the gap filling? So is that an opportunity for us to advocate to, sort of elevate the systems work while we have infrastructure investment available?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's our intention. I think that was a separate recommendation in the Future of Ag Commission report. But as we have developed the concept of this economic development program that's focused on meat, maple, and produce, that's been our intent, is to say that dollars could be invested both to expand food production and processing, as well as increase market access and distribution channels, all in response to, farmers making whatever climate change mitigation improvements they can. So we imagined that some of and the 10 million proposal, the way that we've drafted it is that there would be larger one-time infrastructure investments of up to $500,000 per grantee, sort of acknowledging that this is a one-time opportunity. We're not creating a new program that we're likely to see funded by the legislature, into perpetuity, but this is like a one-time chance for businesses or associations or groups of farmers that are really well poised to make this type of infrastructure investment. And again, we want them to look at their production and processing capability and assess whether there's equipment or capital infrastructure needs or land improvement opportunities or on-farm worker housing accommodations that they need to make or marketing development strategies that they want to take on, but also to be looking at how do we increase market access and distribution. So hopefully the vision that we've outlined and shared with the legislature thus far is to do both of those things.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's really focused on non-dairy, that dairy,
right?
The dairy equivalents are through the Dairy Innovation Program and other existing programs, right?
That's correct.
So this
I
is
mean, I
the
would
transition.
say,
Yeah,
well, this is not focused on dairy because the 10 million has the kind of the diversification of meat, maple, and produce as the focus. These could be transition opportunities for a dairy farm. So it could benefit a dairy producer or the dairy industry as they look to pivot or transition or diversify to something in addition to dairy.
Okay, thanks. That's good to know. Yeah. Karina?
Hi, Karina.
Hi, Abby. So good to see you.
Me too.
I thank you. This has been really interesting conversation, and I am aware of the time, so I don't want to take up too much, but I am interested. I think you've touched on a few things, but I'm interested in having just a brief conversation of the overlap with our Lake Champlain action plan that the Citizens Advisory Committee released and opportunities that you see there. And I just didn't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And again, I obviously don't know the, full intent that your committee had in conversations in developing those priorities, but, the two that I acknowledged of just really focusing on infrastructure and practices that build community resiliency. I know that those were, probably just from my review of the plan, you were thinking most likely ecological systems and conservation practices, but again, I think I speak for the agricultural community in that I think that agriculture can be key to this as a climate mitigation strategy, and well-managed best practice engagement can achieve that same goal. And then the second piece was around, to be really frank, the commission was very clear that, and heard from a variety of stakeholders, that there is not always the most effective relationship between agriculture and environmental partners and stakeholders, and really wanted to focus efforts on improving that relationship building more trust, really focusing on like, how can we reach probably where we have agreement and collaborate to be more effective. And so if you notice in the plan, the recommendations that address that relationship building don't have a budget associated with them. It's not really that we need money to do that. It's, I think, more intention and time to really, meet each other in the middle, have some really frank and honest conversation, build the type of collaboration opportunity where we can trust one another and collaborate more intentionally. So I find that one actually a really interesting space for some ongoing partnership. I mean, again, I think, the committee's endorsement of the infrastructure granting and funding opportunities is great and really simple. And I can share with you some very recent memos that were sent to the Senate Agriculture and Senate Appropriations Committees about why that 14 million is really important from an infrastructure investment. And again, I'm happy to share that with you. But I also would really love the opportunity to either invite members of this committee to attend a Future of Ag Commission meeting or a conversation around how we can actually collaborate and achieve this ag and environmental organization kind of synergy that we know is needed for the work to be effective, and again, an actual response to a lot of the frustration that we've heard from partner organizations.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I love the idea of attending a meeting.
Yeah, I think it would be great. Again, knowing that that's what the commission is looking to the next 6 months or so, is to hear from other groups that are engaged in similar work. Where should there be partnership that we haven't explored previously? Is this, I don't know, like whether the Citizen Advisory Committee could actually be a place to convene some of those ag and environmental conversations potentially. I think that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. I appreciate if you would forward that and keep us in mind for those opportunities. I know that at least when we were in Senate Ag, I was challenged that I was trying to kill dairy when we were presenting our action plan, and I was like, I couldn't be further from the truth. We subsidize dairy a lot and have a really challenging economic environment, and then when their economics are poor, as they have been fairly consistently for a number of years, Senator Starr suggested that makes regulatory compliance that much more challenging. And so our frustrations have been how Agency of Ag and ANR work together to support net positive gains in water quality and take care of the agricultural regulated industry also, and it's been inconsistent and problematic for years. And we've often said just put it all in Agency of Natural Resources or DEC and let them take it over and let ag provide the technical expertise and marketing support and et cetera. And this year we just said, look, just figure it out. Just make it work. We don't care. We're sort of past it, and the de-delegation petition sort of not good or bad. It just added another level of let's just figure this out. So, as we've talked over the last few years, it's clear that transition to non-dairy, non-commodity agriculture is a significant opportunity with climate change and feeding healthy food to people inside the state. And we know that when we've met with the lieutenant governor over the last 5 or more years, a Vermont brand, Vermont processing of dairy for that brand has been a priority of his, and I think we've generally agreed with that. And we just haven't been able to get the legislature to fund it, to do that jump start. We seem like we have so much funding opportunities that maybe we'll never see again, that, as you said, these are one-time big picture opportunities to make strategic investments. And so we've been wholeheartedly supported in that, especially when it is the opportunity to make long-term improvements in water quality. So keep us in mind as those meeting opportunities come up, and I'm sure many of our members might be interested in attending.
Great. I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I did just send to Katie the 2 memos that I referenced.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from members or public?
I have a question. I'm sorry for being late. I had a couple of meetings before this one, so I apologize. This is Carrie Dolan, Representative Carrie Dolan. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie.
So great to see you, Abby. It's always a joy to see you. My question is, early in this legislative session, we got word that the organic dairy, and maybe you've already had the conversation about this, but the organic dairy producers were hurting. They never come to the legislature. That we've never really had to worry about organic dairy because the premium they've been able to gain over the years, there's been a market for that product, and yet they were hit with kind of a triple whammy. I call it a perfect storm of the loss of an important market share, the war in Ukraine, and the result was that they were now operating in the red, and we lost a number of our organic dairies in here in Vermont. And we had attempted on the House side to inject during the budget adjustment process, inject some funding to support the organic industry and organic dairy industry. And yet on the Senate side, they wanted to have a larger conversation about agriculture and the future of agriculture. So could you give us your perspective on, I mean, we were in a panic mode during BAA. Time's always at the essence, and we didn't want to lose any more organic dairy producers. Because we know them, they're our neighbors, and so I would appreciate your perspective on that.
Carrie, did we lose you or did you get distracted by my visitor at my door?
I just I was hoping you could offer us your perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. My partner was going to bring me up water. I was like, I think it's because it's like 95 degrees in this like really sunny office today that I've been in all day that I'm like dying of thirst. Yeah, I mean, I can try to be really brief, and I admit that I am not the dairy expert in our agency by far, but yeah, it was unusual to have the terrible circumstance that has led to where the organic dairy and other, conventional small farms are finding themselves with the increased costs and the inability to have a market that would tolerate their raising prices any higher than they already are, related to inflation and other issues within the economy. So yeah, we haven't seen organic dairy come in looking for the type of kind of emergency support that they did this year. And I think what we can share from the agency's perspective is when we look at the dairy emergency response payments that we have made over the past 2 years in the pandemic process, it didn't often go to the organic dairy community because they weren't in the circumstance that they're finding themselves in now. So that was, again, that's all part of that kind of like perfect storm that you mentioned, Carrie, that they didn't have the need and the loss when the resources were there the first time. And so, thank you. So they didn't receive the support the first round, and here they are asking for the support now. I think it's I think this is where you as legislators are in a really tough spot of making some decisions around sort of supporting and maintaining one industry while also imagining and envisioning the diversification of agriculture that certainly is looking towards the future. And I think there's limited resources, and there's other competing and highly deserving social service needs that are also before the legislature seeking many of these same one-time appropriations. So I don't know that I have by any means have the answer. I see the conundrum and the predicament that lawmakers and policymakers are facing, and have empathy for any small business and certainly our agricultural community that's doing the best they can to maintain viable businesses, feed people, and manage a working landscape, all of which are really critical components to having a vibrant state and rural economy. So sadly, it's probably all important and difficult to identify what's most important.
Yes, and
I don't
I
know. Does that
understand.
answer all your questions though, Carrie?
It does. And I know that, as I understand, the conventional dairy has access to insurance programs that organic dairy hasn't really been able to take advantage of. So I'm hoping that at least on the federal level, there can be imagine a conversation about how to be responsive to the needs of this important niche part of our market, our agricultural workplace. So
yeah, and Carrie, I might just add that we have like the dairy margin coverage program, for example, again, which I am not an expert, does not exclude the organic dairy community, and some operations have taken advantage of those premium payments and insurance supports. It's all dependent upon price paid and kind of, again, market circumstance, which in the first round of the dairy margin coverage, there weren't a lot of organic dairy farms in the condition that they're in currently. And so those dollars are available to organic farms if they're demonstrating the same harm as conventional farms. But if the Appropriations Committee was interested in having one of our staff, it would probably be Laura Ginsberg from our Dairy Business Innovation Center, come in and sort of speak to the dairy margin coverage and some of those price supports that exist for dairy and who's eligible. We'd love to share what we know about that.
yeah, thank you. And just about process, I'm on appropriations, and we received a letter from the chair of the House Agricultural Committee that unanimously supported 1200 support for the organic dairy during budget adjustment, and only to find that this ended up not being a priority for, and that was confusing for us because budget adjustment is usually where we do a true up, but also where we can make strategic investments for initiatives or need to address needs that cannot wait for the standard budget process. And so I would hope that that just from a process perspective that we could, I know it's always hard to predict the future, but the more we can have conversations so we're not surprised or not surprised by either the opportunity or the outcome, because we had we had assumed that this was we were at a crisis, and wanted to be respectful and responsive to a need that we thought was in crisis. And so the more we can have conversations on agricultural priorities, working landscape priorities, needs, and so when it comes to recommendations from the policy committees or the work that within the appropriations committees, that we can be most helpful and responsive to meet those needs. I for one, have always been a huge supporter of a well-run farm. Is exactly what we want. We don't want to replace that with development unnecessarily, because of how important that working landscape is for the overall economy, as well as for the environmental benefits that a working landscape provides. So I just wanted to make that case that the more conversation, communication can only make our work at the legislature that much more effective.
I agree. Yeah, I look forward to that also.
Thanks, Carrie. Abby, thanks so much. Thanks for putting in some extra time to take care of some additional members' questions.
Of course.
Look forward to connecting again. Very much appreciate it. And I guess time to get outside for that cold drink, maybe a beverage or something, but get out of that hot room. So thanks,
Thank you.
and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks for engaging in this conversation, and it was nice to spend the evening with you, really. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby. Bye. That was great.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye, Hillary.
Hi, Marley.
Okay, so next on our agenda is just some retreat planning, and I took a quick look at the doodle poll. I think we've had 8 or 9 people respond, so I'd appreciate it if other folks, you know, I'm not sure exactly who's responded, but right now it looks like I think the best responses were the 18th and maybe the 21st. Seem to be
The 25th. So far, everyone that responded indicated
25th?
they could do the 25th.
Okay, so that's what we're
month are
hovering
we
on.
talking about?
Oh, sorry, July.
Yes. That's where we're hovering around, and so we'll just try to get tighter commitments from the rest of the committee, and hopefully we can get full attendance there. You know, as you know, our plan is to spend some time at the next meeting, assuming the legislature has wrapped up, and try to get a sense from someone, and I haven't quite figured out who. I was thinking maybe Jared Carter or someone might be able to provide us with a update on where the legislature moved on items that were connected to our action plan, and connect the dots for us on that. And that might help frame our conversations working into the summer and at the retreat for follow-up in our action plan. So that was just my first thought. If anyone else has any other considerations on who might be able to really dial in for us what legislature is on hold, what legislation is on hold or moving or did move, and how it impacts our action planning over the May, June, and then July meeting at the retreat. So that was my first thought. Those 2 dates, well, at least the 25th for now, and then we'll work on an agenda. If people have specific interests, we'd love to hear about them, but a big part of that work is trying to take a leap on action plan for some, you know, task force work until our meeting in September. And I think try to get a pretty well cooked action plan out in the fall so that legislators can be considering it as they're working towards the beginning of the second half of the biennium. And I think that's what we agreed over our last few meetings as an approach for our action plan for this year. Also at the retreat, we'll be doing our annual elections for chair and vice chair. And as you know, we've set up sort of a succession plan. And Denise has been vice chair for 2 years now, and I think is ready to take over as chair. And so assuming that she is elected by you all to take over as chair, we'll be looking for chair and vice chair for the next year. Wayne?
Yeah, Mark, I know we kind of ran short on time with Abby, but, you know, just thinking through her presentation and a lot of great stuff in there, but we're kind of still like stuck in the moment a little bit. We're kind of focused on kind of what's going on now at the present here with the legislature. I know there's been a lot of challenges this year over the last couple of weeks, but kind of curious, like even for their group, like what's, you know, what are their priorities? What are they interested in over the next 3 to 4 months? So if they've, depending how things shake out, I guess with some of the legislative decisions, you know, how can we wrap some of their possible priorities into what we're thinking about for the next session? So it all kind of comes back to this, you know, timing thing, I guess, Mark.
Well, I'm hopeful that their May and June meetings that we might be able to have some connection and follow up on their where they see those gaps. That if we can use my analogy or my thinking on that is to find out where the gaps and where we might be able to find alignment and find our opportunities for highlighting those issues in our action plan coming up. So
yeah, I mean, no, it's hard now because they don't know maybe exactly where they may end up for this year, but and that's probably obviously going to form some of their decisions moving forward. But it's, you know, we kind of seem to keep in this kind of timing thing, Mark. So
yeah, no, I hear I hope that we might create a little more tighter linkage with them, so that we can have really closer communications and find that alignment as we're working towards our action plan. And I think by the time we're sort of polishing our action plan, or July or August, I think we'll have a better read on perhaps some of the more detailed focus that we've heard from the legislators wanting a little more definition to our action plan priorities. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think we'll find a path for some better alignment with them over the next 3+ months, and certainly no more after the budget cycling is done.
I mean, I think there's 2 goals. One is more detail in the action plan, but also getting it out earlier, right? Said that, Mark, or not, but getting it out so that there's opportunity to for people to use it prior to the session beginning. So I like the plan of having somebody come to the May-June meeting and speaking about what happened in the legislature, where things ended up, because I think that will inform our strategy for the July retreat when we pick priorities and put more detailed language, succinct, detailed language in the action plan, but as opposed to just asking for broad resources and investments. I think that was the feedback that we got from Senator Brock.
Yeah, my thought on Jared, if we could, he you know, is in the legislature always for the Water Caucus, which is the, you know, association of environmental advocates, what you know, water quality advocates. And so I think he could very quickly, if he would, make he could connect the dots for us on specific legislation and how it may or may not impact our action plan priorities, probably as well as anybody that I can think of right now. Karina, you have any thoughts on that?
I think, yeah, Jared's the strong contender there. Not a lot of others are coming to surface, but I'll think on it.
So that was just my first thought. We'll keep working on that. But if someone like him that could quickly, I don't know whether there's a ledge council member who might be able to do that too. He might be able to do it better and more succinctly for us in our work. So we'll keep thinking
Mark,
on that.
His last name is Carpenter, and I think Ledge Council has spread its environmental related bill development across a number of different lawyers. So Jared may be the best option there.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Sure.
And so next is a conversation around governance and membership. And so thinking about elections and Denise taking leadership and vice chair, I've asked Denise whether she might lead some of the conversation around membership and governance as we're building towards that. I know that there's still half of the, actually, there's 6 members who are still operating with expired memberships, and Sarah Coleman and Emily Bird are working on that with the secretary in the governor's office to get those reappointments in. I'll see Sarah over the next few days, so hopefully I'll get some more follow-up, but I didn't hear from the governor's office yet. So hopefully those will be straightforward and we'll move on with them. The last I looked was, let me just confirm with all of you. They are Eric Clifford, Karina, Bob Fisher, Hillary Solomon, and Denise are members who are operating with expired terms. So we'll work on those, and that leaves us with 2 vacancies to fill. And so I think that's the topic for us. We've asked folks in the survey that went out to weigh in on where they see their strengths and skills and what they bring to the committee, and opportunities for members to weigh in on where are their gaps, what other skills or diversity of opinion and representation, I guess, from various industries or demographics can we look to as we're beginning to fill those additional vacancies. So Denise, you still on?
And Mark, I just had a question. I find it curious that my term has expired when I just joined.
You were appointed to fill a term.
I see. From
how
David.
they did that. And so I think Jeff Wenberg maybe had some.
David Mears.
Was it David Mears?
Yeah.
Who you filled?
Yeah.
I think that's how they filled that.
Okay.
In our minds, we were just appointing a new member for another full term, but that's not what I saw on the actual appointment notification. So I think it's just a matter of them actually putting the paper in front of the governor and have his signature on it, and being sure. I think that Julie Moore as secretary approves, because I think that she also appoints a number of Basin Program members on the steering committee. That it used to be governor and they moved it to the secretaries of the agencies of either DEC or ANR. And so I think that's the process, and it just, someone needs to shepherd it along. And so that's why I've asked Sarah and Emily to try to fast track that so we can focus on the new ones and get those approvals through and done. And it'd be nice if we could do it in time for our July election. I'd love to bring on new people for the retreat. You know, in an ideal world, it'd be a great introduction to our work and to working with the rest of the committee members. Any other thoughts on
Hillary's hand is up, Mark.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Hillary.
Were we, as the members, were we going to see the results, like a collated maybe group of results where, people were asked, like, what do you think the gaps are, and what sort of who would you recommend as to reach out to? Because that might be an interesting, like, to be able to see what everybody thinks are the gaps might be really interesting.
Yeah, that was my plan. You were one of 3 people who filled it out so far, so we don't we don't have a great base to pull from right now. So I just dropped it in the chat, and yeah, it just takes a couple of minutes. Hillary can attest to how simple it was to do. So yeah, and I think that having that, being able to pull all that together would be pretty helpful for everyone. It was, I mean, even with just the 3 responses, it was interesting for me to see that, 2 of those 3 said that we should consider having someone with, forestry background on the committee. So seeing where else folks think those gaps are would be really helpful.
Right.
It might help us reach out to people too, like if we knew that was like forestry was a big, something, or maybe diversified agriculture, having a member from that group, then maybe we could build a list to reach out to.
Exactly. And I also reached out to Sarah Coleman on recruitment. So I wanted to see whether there was a specific recruitment process, because I know that in the past it's been sort of our network. And there was some discussion about whether and how we might give public notice that they are available. And then what would that process look like? Is it a letter of interest? I mean, there is the governor's application process online. And then historically, we've asked people to send a letter of interest for the committee's consideration, and we've shared that and had conversations. So I wondered whether there was anything happening, especially in light of the diversity, equity, inclusion efforts inside the Basin program and again inside the state. And so Sarah has shared us a little bit of preliminary and mentioned that there was a recruitment procedure being developed. So hopefully that will be available to us sooner rather than later. For now, she shared some resources from I think it's the Office of Racial Equity at the state, and just some guidelines for consideration as just preliminary for us to think about as we're working along. So, but we will do a follow-up after this meeting and try to get more of our members to respond. It's a pretty short little form that Katie developed for us to weigh in on who. And again, I thought forestry, and again, that young alternative agriculture farmer representation would be nice to have another voice from that part of the industry. Wayne?
Yeah, I did fill the questionnaire out, and it was kind of interesting to think through. I was kind of thinking about who we had and guess who we'd kind of stick in moving forward. One of the things I think, one of the gaps, just kind of thinking out loud a little bit, is kind of the recreational area. Maybe that's our but that seems to be kind of a representative, with a big focus, obviously, with the tourism and the recreational opportunities. But I think that would be a kind of an interesting addition to the group too.
I was actually sorry, Wayne, to kind of go along with that. I actually think like a fisherman or fisherwoman, somebody who's grown up on the lake. I think that would be a really interesting perspective as well. People that use the lake both for recreation and food sources. And I just, Mark, did we send that, what Sarah Coleman's? I just had a chance today to review it. What you sent to me, the information from the Office of Racial Equity, as well as the attachments. I thought it was all great information.
Yeah, I didn't hear that yet. I wanted to get through that and then get through this phase of the meeting and decide whether to share it with other members for consideration before the next meeting.
I mean, I thought, it's great. I actually shared it. I'm heading up some equity and diversity work at Northwestern Medical Center, and I shared it with the committee who's working on that there. Just I thought it was such good material. So anyways, I would recommend sending it out, but let's have this conversation first. I agree.
Okay. All right. Well, Denise, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Thanks. Okay.
And you're, at least for me, there's a little bit of a breakup in my feed. I don't know if others are hearing it, but I'm getting a little bit of a breakup in. I was having it with Abby's and a little bit with yours just now, and also with Carrie's.
Did anybody else, am I breaking up to anybody else, or is it Mark's Wi-Fi?
I think it's Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear both.
So far, everybody sounded pretty good to me.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna turn off all of the incoming video and see if I can improve the audio. So good to see you all. See you later.
So you're leaving, Mark? Is Katie leaving us too?
No, I'm not leaving. I'm just gonna shut off all video and listen for a while.
Okay. So I think Mark posed two questions, or I guess, well, a few questions, but one was really around the governance structure. We basically have two governance positions. One is chair and the other one is vice chair. And I think the expectation, or not expectation, and it's not a requirement, but anyways, once you become vice chair, ideally within 1 or 2 years, you want to become the chair. So I'm happy. I'd asked Mark for another year because I was just getting involved in too many things, and I really didn't feel like this past year I could lead the meetings effectively. I feel much more confident about it now that I've and I'm sorry I'm on my phone. I tried to get on my Teams on my laptop, but it's not working for some reason. So that's why you get Denise with her phone on. But I feel now I'm more capable of doing. Obviously, this is an election, so it's not a given that the vice chair becomes the chair. So if anybody else is interested in being chair, I think we would happily take nominations. Katie, can you just remind me when all of this happens? Is this all happening at the retreat? I feel like that's when we did it. Okay. I would love to know if there's anybody on the call right now that cannot make July 25th work for them, because when I looked at the survey, it seemed like everybody, including Lori, I think that was Lori's only date that she could make work, Katie. Yeah, okay. Is there anybody that's going on vacation that week or out of town, or can we just assume, and maybe we just send out a note, Katie, after the meeting and say July 25th is the date that most people can attend?
Yeah, so looking at, it looks like Carrie can't make the 25th.
Oh, Carrie Dolan.
Yeah.
Okay. So that
I
would
will
be.
try.
You can. Are you
I will
going?
try my darndest. Yeah, I was going to go see my daughters, but I could see if I can. That was the week because my one daughter is a school teacher, and they start, believe it or not, in the Oakland school system first week in August. So I was trying to figure out when to see her. But I could try to make that. But I think that was the week I was hoping to go see her. Let me take a look at the calendar.
We could. I mean, we did. I mean, I know I couldn't attend in person last year because I was sick. So maybe we could set it up if we do it at the Howland House. Why am I calling it the Howland House? The Lake Champlain Basin Program House. I think that's what Mark we were suggesting, is having it just at the Basin Program House, which I'm forgetting.
And we have this year, we have the little virtual owl. So, and we would be sure to have the meeting in a place with good Wi-Fi if we were going to do a hybrid meeting. So Lauren and I aren't just walking around with my cell phone for 6 hours.
I just want to say it's possible
that I've applied for a program that takes place for 3 weeks in July. I may or may not be accepted and I may or may not go. But if I do, then it would be a problem for me. But maybe I could just be there part of the day.
Yeah, I think we had to settle on July as our month for the retreat. And now, so unless, I don't know, we don't want to push this back till August, Katie, right?
I don't think so. Speaking personally, but I'll let Mark chime in.
I mean, August has always been, it's almost impossible to get more than a handful of people. There's just too much. And so in June seemed like people were still pretty busy. So July so far seems like the greatest number available. I think we had 9 or 10 positive responses for the 25th, which is pretty good so far.
Yeah, and if we can make it virtual.
How did it look the week before?
Yeah, so the previous Tuesday, the 18th, is the other contender. There were a couple of people, Mark and Denise, you both had noted that you could make it work if needed. And Lori and Sarah were the only ones who said that they couldn't go that date so far.
Yeah, I'm just traveling back from Michigan from a wedding, and so I probably will be back on Monday. I just was giving a weather travel buffer. But if we choose that, I can be sure I'm back. The 18th.
And I could try to, I need to coordinate with my daughter and try to make the 25th, but that was the weekend I was trying to be visiting her. She got engaged recently. So, we were going to go wedding dress shopping, but, but I could leave the next day or something. It just crunches the time. But she starts school the 3rd of August, so that's why. But I can coordinate with her, see what works. Maybe I don't want to be the one person in the stickler. Why don't we keep to the 25th and I'll see what I can do to be there.
Okay, but if not, we are going to do it in a place that's virtual so we can set up
Right.
good one. Okay. And at least maybe some people could just attend and listen and participate that way. Okay, so now let's get back to the governance question. Is everybody okay with moving on from the day conversation? Okay. So I'm curious if there's any, and I don't know if we do this now, but is anybody interested in being vice chair? You don't have to answer now, but maybe send Mark and Katie and me a note if you are. And then we could have a slate of officers or maybe have a vote of people, or if anybody's interested in being chair, that would be the other. Don't all jump up at once. Vice chair is great because you get to be part of the meetings and lead them when Mark, or if I'm chair, is not around. So, but then at some point you may or may not have to take over as chair. So we'll give it some thought. We still have a couple months to think about it. So if anybody's interested. And I do really want to have the diversity conversation for this committee. And I do think that there's, so please fill out the survey. I actually just did it while you guys were talking a minute ago after Katie sent the link out. It really is a very quick survey. And I think, Mark, I don't know if Katie got that information too from Sarah, but I feel like we should send that out to everybody because there's some really good advice, I think, in there, and also some pitfalls to avoid as you're trying to diversify boards, organizations, and committees. So things to think about. I have heard there's a couple of people who are interested in joining the CAC. And you know, just thinking about whether or not they're, I don't know how to say this, Mark. I don't know if you want to share, but wanting to think about the diversity of the group that we have and how we're representing ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of people have expressed interest. When I looked back at my notes, there was a suggestion that Megan Moore, who's Burlington Water Resources lead, would be a great candidate. I think there was some discussion that we've got Chittenden County wastewater representation, at least from that industry and that perspective, with Bob, and some question about you know, more Southern Vermont representation too. So when historically we've thought about skills, geographic diversity, gender, and you know, other voices that have not been you know, regularly represented on the committee. And so that's where we were. And with new initiatives at the state level and within the Basin program, we wanted to consider those. So I asked Sarah Coleman to share with me what the state was doing. We'll be discussing this weekend, I think, approving some of the work the Basin program has been doing, specifically around grant, issuing grants and giving weight to disenfranchised communities. And so I think all of that plays into the consideration. What Sarah sent along, and I didn't have a chance to look at it in depth until recently, but I did share it with Denise in anticipation of the conversation. And I just want to make sure that it wasn't anything that was confidential at this point. And based on a reread of it before the meeting today, I don't see anything that's confidential. It's a lot of preliminary work and other resources around considerations for inclusion and diversity in boards, commissions, and in hiring. So I think it's all good information for us to consider, and we'll share that with everyone. I think it's good not just for our work here, but just for all of our work in general. And so we'll condense or put that into a PDF or something with links and share that with everyone after the meeting.
Mark, what would be the process? So once we get nominations, would we vote on them at the July meeting, or is that something like, do we have to approve new members to this committee, or is it all done by the governor?
It's all done by the governor and by Julie Moore as secretary. And so I think what's happened, and I don't know because I haven't never operated within the conversations between the governor and the secretary and the administration's staff, was I think they tend to accept the recommendations, and that's all we've done is we've gleaned and said we think these individuals would be excellent new additions to the CAC. And I think they've generally gone along with it, and they've generally gone along with our suggestions for reappointments. So I think that's the process. And
but really what you and I talked about the other day is that, you know, what we want to get people outside of our circles, right? Like, so that we're not just echo chambering information at the CAC meeting. And so that's the challenge, Vermont, is the relational work we all do together, and then we sort of tend to create, find people that look and think like us. And so I think that was sort of like one of the things that we're sort of challenging ourselves to do, is to look a little bit beyond our direct relations.
Right. And when I brought up the issue of recruitment and how would we, sort of put that out there in media, when I was talking to Sarah, and the considerations we would take that get it beyond the sort of traditional media to media that might be inviting to communities that have not traditionally had voices in the work that we do. And so how can we meaningfully do that? And are there limitations or anything like that? So I think
Do you
that
have an
I
answer
agree.
for
That's
that?
where we are in trying to figure out how do we best communicate the availability of the memberships, and then how do we equitably invite folks to, initially just make that application to the governors, and then to the governor's online commission site, and then our history has been a letter of interest, so that we can weigh that. Does it generally fit our perception of the additional skill sets, the demographics of geographic representation that we've historically tried to find and balance within the committee? So it's not overly Chittenden County focused, and a very broad range of the skill sets that get brought to the table. We seem to have done an okay job balancing over the years.
Any thoughts from any of the other commissioners? I mean, I guess I hearing nothing. So we're going to wait for Sarah to let us know what sorts of media we could put out there about having some openings.
Yeah, I expect that we'll just be getting back that you have no limitations, but I understood from her email that there were some recruitment procedures being developed as the state is actively creating a DEI initiative throughout all aspects of the state.
Okay.
So I should know more by Wednesday after I get a chance to chat with Sarah and others here.
Okay. And so I guess so over the next couple of months before the July retreat, we should try to have some names and they've potentially gone onto the website and applied to the governor's commission page.
Yeah.
And we can't really stop anybody from doing that. Like if someone wants to do that, they can just do that. And then our role really is to recommend to
Yeah, we don't have any specific like no documented role. There's nothing in our enabling statute or anything like that. We're governor appointed. It's been a process, and I think, like the Commission on the Future of Ag, was a fairly transparent process trying to glean a diversity of voices on that actively. And so, I think that somewhat informs our process, like where the governor and others were thinking on it. And so I think that's part of what's sort of stewing in the background and sort of catching up with our post-COVID environment. Wayne?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have a couple simple parameters. I would think it's obviously somebody that lives or has some kind of function in the watershed. And then I guess has some kind of interest in the lake. I mean, those are kind of general categories. I guess if you put that out, I'm not sure if you can put that in that, or you just kind of see who would apply, I guess, and kind of vet it after the fact. But those are, to me, would be a couple basic parameters, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what we've done. And then, as if there's a vetting process, we have looked to fill Southern Vermont geographic representation. That had been a priority. It was when oh man.
I know, I'm forgetting her name too.
So great. The site.
Sherry.
Sherry.
Yeah, I
When
was gonna say Sherry.
Yeah, when Sherry left, we wanted to replace her spot with someone else from Addison County or south. So that's been a consideration. And I think, personally, we don't need more old white attorneys on the committee. And wastewater engineers. I'm not sure we need more. So as we look to sort of the skills and industry voices that we can bring to the table, to have those other networks brought to our committee network, and then connect with the legislators that are nominated and appointed onto the CAC. I think those are sort of when we get into the vetting mode. But I think this piece is the ability to cast a broader net, so to speak, than our internal networking as we talk amongst ourselves and consider so-and-so might be a great position, so-and-so. And so that's a little smaller net than I think we should be working on in this time. The two people that have had some preliminary have reached out, both are my age and have been deeply involved in Lake Champlain issues for most of their careers, and would be great voices and great institutional history and perspectives to be part of the CAC. I just paused a little bit initially, didn't say, of course, I have no option of saying no, as Denise made clear, that they can apply to the governors, and I suggested that they do that. I would like to see us pursue this broader net casting as a deliberative process as we're working along our membership diversification over the next years. So that's the only reason that we're having some of this conversation now. Not only reason, I didn't mean it like that. It's just, that's the key reason we're having the conversation now.
Mark, this is Carrie. Thank you for raising this topic, and Denise and everyone. I think this is important to have this conversation, especially when we look to the future and the work ahead of us. So I know firsthand that if we don't put together criteria or think about that this membership, we may not necessarily get the type of talent or advocate that that makes for an effective member. And I like Wayne's suggestion of thinking about criteria, what would constitute the qualities we're looking for, and certainly what's missing, but that having that commitment, that passion, that energy is so important here. And yet perhaps there are, as we're having this conversation, there are people that haven't had that opportunity. I know also firsthand when we're not engaged, you run the risk of having members that may not necessarily be the most suited for this type of commission, or committee, and I've seen that play out in I guess a more of a frustrated manner. So I appreciate you raising these questions and asking these questions. I filled out that survey. I left that whole question blank only because I think being able to kind of put our heads together and come up with ideas will be helpful. If you give us a little bit more time to do that, I appreciate that. But thank you for raising these issues. So important.
Thanks, Carrie. Wayne?
I think the point is if we don't go about it intentionally, right, we're and thoughtfully, we're not really adding diversity to the commission at all. It's just going to continue the way that it is and has been. And so thinking about the future, right? Okay, so take a thinking about the future. I mean, that's really what we need to focus on. And I think it's important that we have, new perspectives and different voices. And obviously people that are passionate about the lake and passionate about, the environment that we live in here. So, yeah. I'm glad we're having this conversation, I guess. And I'm looking forward to learning or knowing whether or not we can cast a broader, wider net to recruit members.
Right. Wayne, did you have a?
Yeah, Mark, just a quick comment. I know one of the questions I asked is my understanding is that there's not a residency requirement, so you do not have to be a Vermont resident to be a member. I know I'd asked about that for clarification because that's probably something I'm going to be faced with in the next couple of years. So if that's the case, I mean, you can find somebody that spends 6 months up here, that's passionate about the lake, that's got some kind of unique kind of expertise or interest like that. So I don't know. That's something to just put out there, consideration.
That's a good reminder. I asked, and I don't know. There's nothing specific, for or against residency. And I don't know that I got the specific answer when I reached out to Sarah and Emily some time ago, or whether or not the governor's commissions require sort of full-time residency here. So I'll follow up with that. But you're right. I think perhaps we can add another question or another list to the survey that is, what is the committee's perception of sort of the core requirements? And maybe we don't have to, but that it's passionate about the lake and live in the basin were the two ones that I think we started with, are the first big filters. And I don't know, I'm not a good survey writer, so maybe
well, I can share the New York CAC is a slightly different membership appointment process. So we put together an application, and part of that was, they identified criteria. So I can share the criteria that they developed, and we can talk about what we want to keep or change for this committee.
Oh, that'd be helpful. Something to start with. Okay, it is 7:04 and looks like we just lost Wayne. Oh, go ahead, Hillary.
I was just wondering, it felt like we had maybe had a request by Abby Willard to support that 3 million in the Working Lands Enterprise and 10 million in the whichever other fund that was going toward product development. Did we want to circle back around to talk about that? We don't have a quorum anymore, so I don't think we can do it now, but was that a request for us to send a letter to the legislature or something? It kind of sounded like that to me.
That's what I heard. I think that I think it's something that we'd have to do, via email and see whether we could develop a consensus proxy support to weigh in on that. But I mean, it fits with our priorities about investing in that key infrastructure. And so I don't think it's a big issue, but I think I'd like to take the time to reach out and find out where it is in the budget process and figure out who we would be advocating to at this point. So let's do that. And we'll, as part of our follow-up, I'll talk to Katie when I see her tomorrow on a follow-up email to everyone and see whether we can develop a consensus response and support to that, because that is what I heard from Abby was, here's 2 places you can start that seem fully aligned.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
While I just have to mention, while I came in partly through that, but I was in the appropriations when this topic came up and we supported it with 5 million. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, sorry, I unmuted. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I can hear you, Carrie.
Yeah, there's so just I think it's no surprise in appropriations the demand for resources outweigh the available dollars many times over, and so we have to be careful when we fund new initiatives, especially with one-time funding. We reserve one-time funding for one-time needs, and when you have new programs that may require ongoing funding, there's that consideration. But there's also, it's a difficult job in appropriations when you don't have all the answers. You're brought what's brought forward is what could be an important initiative and program, not a lot of detail. And when you weigh in all the other demands on that $1, it is a challenge. So we still provided, at least on the House side, some support, but there's there was some question as to what the actual. I think there were a number of folks looking for more information to help justify the substantial ask.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at some of that testimony and see if I can make sense of it in a way that we might create a communication to the CAC around it and see where it's going in the Senate. I know that, yeah, there's a lot of big initiatives with lots of big dollar signs on it attached to them around a whole suite of issues supporting workforce, and
especially when you're asking for funding for marketing, it's just really hard to quantify the performance measures from some of that. The other thing is, I know we are talking about meat, maple, and produce. On the maple front, there's a whole need out there that we haven't had a chance to talk about. But small maple producers are being confronted with the same challenges that small dairy producers were facing 15, 20 years ago. And they're getting basically pushed out. And part of it is through certification that their sugar houses are all stainless steel with new floors and wipeable walls and ceilings and no wood, and
Right.
can't roast your hot dog in there any longer. And so there is a frustration out there too on small maple, and that's an area that would be in the context of this, at least partly so. Um, Although I raised this with the Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture, and they were mostly looking at maple in the context of marketing, not necessarily trying to address this concern. There is some federal funding to help, thanks to Leahy, has an earmark and shepherding 600,000 through the Vermont Maple Association to help provide small grants to our small producers. But these are big costs that
Yeah.
for our small producers are going to be faced with. Right now, the certification is not mandatory, but it looks like it's heading that way. It's on a federal scale. And so I only mention that because, I mean, there are going to be ongoing challenges across the board on our working landscape. What is our role here as Citizens Advisory Committee? And I just, good ideas are, whether it be supporting marketing of our products or other needs, are certainly worthy of our attention, or society's attention, or the legislature's attention, and the governor's funding budgets, draft budgets. But I just raise these issues because this is the kind of the detail that we get into in the legislature when we're comparing, say, funding for invasive species prevention, control, or funding this, or it's not one versus another, but it's the whole the whole set of demands. It's a challenge, I tell you. It's because of the every request is worthy and important and valuable. But at the end of the day, how do we decide? And we do turn to the policy committees for input, and letters we get, and testimony we receive, and public input we get during public hearings. But this is one of those examples of we just didn't have enough information to be able to fully fund something that didn't have a lot of detail. Important, yes, but again, we had to make a decision on the House side. There's still time in the Senate.
Well, we'll follow up. That's really good, important information, Carrie. Thanks. We appreciate that. It's I know it's really hard, and I know I hear Senator Brock often in sort of his, investing in programmatic work where it leverages other dollars, federal or local or et cetera, like invasive species management. That seems to make a lot of sense. And when we have one-time funds for one-time big capital investments, that, hopefully with good policy and good strategic investment, that will provide returns by enhancing the marketplace, et cetera, like these distribution hubs for small producers to get their market produce into local schools and keep that circular economy happening here in Vermont. So the details are it's where the devil lays, as they say, right? So we do appreciate that. I'll dig into it some more and see if it makes sense for us to take a sort of proxy action on between now and our next meeting, because theoretically our next meeting, the legislature will have adjourned. So
Right.
We'll see what we can do.
And if I just one more thought, everything we do now because of legislative action, needs to have accountability. You know, we use results-based accountability throughout our investments to ensure that we're maximizing that dollar invested. Who's benefiting? What does that look like? How do we know who's better off, and how do we know that? How do we quantify or qualify that kind of investment? And that's a requirement. And so again, it adds a further challenge when we appropriate dollars. We need to, we lean heavily on the advice of and the guidance and recommendations coming out of those policy committees.
Okay. All right, well, thanks everyone for lingering longer. Anything else before we adjourn?
Just if you're interested in being chair or vice chair, just email Mark, Katie, or me. I think we've got to, and if you think of anybody or have any thoughts on anyone who could possibly join, that would be great as well. Be nice to have some names in like May and June to think of. I don't know if we get them there by the July retreat, Mark, but that could be a goal.
I like that as a goal. Aspirational.
Very aspirational. Our vision.
Okay. And if I may, one more.
Mm-hmm.
On this same conversation from Abby, I mean, if we could put together kind of a briefing of what this is, what does this look like, and the why. I mean, I could certainly be convinced, because again, as I mentioned, a well-run farm, working landscape is what we want to achieve and strive for. And so I don't at all mean to douse anything with cold water, but it's just wanted to at least show you a little bit of the thought process that went on. And here's an opportunity for us to be really, I think, helpful in how we could continue to support an overall overarching theme of a strong and vibrant and sustainable working landscape.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hoping, that we can come up with something that addresses those issues a little more succinctly for us before we could take that sort of proxy action between meetings. So let me dig into it and see if it's something we might be able to do. And Katie and I will follow up with a sort of a punch list of some reminder action items around membership and governance and our upcoming meetings when we get a chance over the next couple of days. So we'll follow up. Okay, everyone. Thanks again for hanging in there, and looking forward to more. And we will share the materials that were shared by Sarah Coleman with all of you for consideration as we're thinking about diversification of membership. So we'll get that to you within a day or two. Enjoy the sun.
That's great.
Get outside if you're having.
Thank you so much.
And
Good night.
Thank you.
Talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Katie.